Oh, no, rubbish. Ooh, sorry. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Climate Science Partnerships for Global Action here at COP26. and welcome also to those who couldn't be here today and are joining us online. Now, I'm your host, Dr Maggie Aderin-Pocock, and it truly is an honour to be here because this is where it's happening. Now, I can see in the future sort of talking to my grandchildren and saying, yes, I was there when the world decided to save the planet. But I think, of course, things do lie in the balance. And so we still have decisions to make. But I think the thing that will enable us to make the right decision is actually truly understanding the problem. And that's what this session is all around. Looking at sort of how we can work together across the globe to find global solutions. Now, as I'm working as a space scientist on a number of projects, I've got a good understanding of how the climate is changing and how understanding the mechanisms behind climate change is important to all of us, because climate change has an impact on all of us. And in all these missions that I've worked on, one of the key factors is working together, collaborating. Because I think by working together, we really can do the seemingly impossible. So I feel very privileged to be hosting this event especially because it's centred on the work of meteorological offices around the world. And of course, a focus on the Met Office here in the UK and the collaborations that they're doing. Now, they're all committed to making the planet more informed about the dangers of climate change and protecting vulnerable people across the world. So to explore this further, I'd like to introduce Professor Penny Endersby, who's the Chief Executive of the Met Office. But before that, I'd like to introduce Paul Monk, because unfortunately the Science Minister wasn't able to be with us today. So Paul has very kindly stepped in to give our keynote address. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Maggie, and good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Monks. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And good morning to you all. Minister Freeman sends his apologies. He would have loved to be here today, but unfortunately he's unwell, so I'm going to give this speech on his behalf. The great Sir David Attenborough once said, "The whole of life is coming to terms with yourself and the natural world. Why are you here? How do you fit? What's it all about?" I believe COP26 is the right time to ask these questions and to ask what more we can do to protect our precious planet. Each year, we bear witness to new climate challenges at home and abroad. Storm Christoph, the heat dome of the Pacific Northwest, wildfires in Greece and California, flooding in West Germany and China. During the summit, we've heard world leaders talk about plans needed at every level of society to keep 1.5 degrees in reach. We must now think about how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. As a Chief Scientific Advisor, I'm clear that as we embark on this huge global challenge, we must use science to guide the way. We've demonstrated the power of science and what it can deliver quite recently. During the pandemic, the rapid creation of vaccines, we saw that sheer power of science. Now, as the world begins to recover from the awful virus, we must harness science again for its power for greater good. Scientists can be amazing role models, experts at creating positive cross-border relationships needed to make change happen. The science community is forged by rigor and creativity and persistence and patience. And I'm delighted they are skills that we will bring to bear on this challenge of climate science. UK research has rightly earned a world-class reputation. We have 4 of the world's top 10 universities. Our research councils and national academies are the envy of the world. We have a thriving private sector investing in research. And overseas businesses want to come to Britain to invest in talent and skills. All of this puts us in good stead to shape a new era of sustainable growth locally and globally in the coming decades. I'm proud of the fact that the department that I work in, the UK Business Department, has invested in 500 world-class projects and partnerships with low and middle-income countries to better understand climate change. UK-backed research for international development has enabled our universities to expand and develop new partnerships, to broaden their geographical reach, fund projects that would otherwise not have happened, and create opportunities for career development and talent attraction. Our researchers and innovators work around the clock, around the world, tackling glacial retreat in the Peruvian Andes, food insecurity in the Western Indian Ocean, creating agri-tech solution for farmers in South America, sensors that predict sudden landslides in Malaysia, and conservation programs for native seeds in Mexico. And then, of course, we have the Met Office, the exceptional organisation that is the focus of our discussion today. Through the Met Office, the UK has created a plethora of programmes that harness those brilliant relationships, making important strides when it comes to our collective scientific knowledge about climate change. With its partners around the world, the Met Office has transformed the quality of weather and climate information, particularly in the Global South, helping us to understand the threat of extreme weather, working with local communities to develop new tools and services to tackle it, and informing governments so that they can put the right adaptation and resilience policies in place to protect their people, including right here in the UK. If you know anything about the Met Office, they have long and wonderful names for their programmes, so I'm going to not list them here to save us all time, and hopefully Penny can avoid that as well as part of her talk. But these programmes build on successful partnerships between those who produce weather and climate services and the organisations that use them. Led by Professor Penny Endersby, the Met Office team has delivered transformational change in the quality, accessibility and the use of weather and climate information, supporting decision-making, improving resilience and helping to avoid economic losses. There is no doubt, in my mind, that the Met Office is a global leader in climate science, partly because of its unique history, partly because of the experts based at the Hadley Centre, partly because of its incredible use of technology, including satellites and supercomputers, but perhaps most importantly, about the way that it thinks about international collaboration, builds super relationships which cross borders and whole continents. It builds relationships that support critical services, protect jobs and saves lives. When in the UK we talk about a global science superpower or an innovation nation, it's because of the success of bodies like the Met Office and its brilliant staff. Moving forwards, we want to build on that expertise of our world-leading organisation. We want to use all the levers of government, our high commissioners, science and innovation officers, diplomacy, free trade negotiations to support and drive investment in the best research collaborations. To me, it feels like we are starting to come to terms with ourselves and the natural world. We know this is about the fate of our planet. This is a chance for our generations to put thinking into action, the action that we need to give future generations a chance. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to Penny.
Thank you very much, Paul, or Minister Freeman. With that hat, you'll be Paul later. So yes, I'm Penny Endersby. It's a great pleasure to be here today. And when I was asked to give this talk, I chose to do something I've not done before and look at it through the lens of the Met Office values. And that's because the topic of the talk really spoke to the values we hold as an organisation. And the Met Office actually refreshed our values in 2019, and all of these are built from what our staff told us makes them get out of bed in the morning and come to work. And some of them are things that have been important to us since Admiral Fitzroy founded it in 1854. So the need to take whatever the state of the art of science is today and translate that into saving lives. But the scale of the challenge facing us as a species with climate change and the sheer breadth of expertise that you need to deal with it has increased the need for partnerships around the globe. And I have to say, that probably was not a strength of Fitzroy's, and part of the sad end he came to was down to his need to keep everything in his own head rather than share it with the people that he worked with. So the first of our values, and the one that's sort of the theme of the whole talk, is being better together. It's one of our 5 values. If you happen to be local, I know it can mean something else in Scotland. This is not a political statement. But many of you will be familiar with Joy's Law, which says that whoever you are, most of the smartest people work for somebody else. And in the UK, we're fortunate to be a large, capable Met Service with a proud history of investment in our science by governments of all colours going back decades. But even we can't hope to be world-leading in everything. So we have to pick the areas where we really want to be world leading ourselves, and then find people to partner with who are the best of the best in areas that we can't hope to be world leading as well. And that's really the theme of the rest of the talk. So the next of our values is being experts by nature, and this probably is something that Fitzroy would have recognised, and it isn't just scientific expertise, it's also all sorts of expertise. And here's some examples of that. And at the beginning of this, of COP26, you'll have seen the State of the Climate report published by our friends from WMO, and that's actually a three-way effort between us, NOAA, and the World Meteorological Organization. But the lead author for that is Met Office scientist John Kennedy. And then obviously the whole of COP is shaped by the content of the IPCC reports. And the Met Office always contributes a huge part to that with our modelling output. We've got 30 authors across all of the 6 reports, including 2 coordinating lead authors and 3 lead authors here busy this week, making sure that the science truly informs both the decisions the world leaders make and then what we need to do about the challenge of climate change. And the third example on this slide is our unified model. That's the model we use for our weather forecast. And it's called unified because we run a seamless model through all timescales, from very short term through to the long-term climate models. And it's not something that we do just on our own. So actually our model is used by 8 other countries and the US Air Force. And they pay us a bit for the use, but also they contribute science in kind. And for example, Korea help us with the modelling of typhoons, Australia with wildfires, and New Zealand with ice nucleation in the southern oceans. And it's immediately obvious that they're better placed to do that than we would be here in the UK. And those things feed back into the model and give all of us better outcomes. And the last example on this slide is our academic partnership. And the Met Office has a long-standing academic partnership with some of the best UK universities, many of them the sort of specialist ones with great examples of meteorological and environmental sciences, but also now some of the areas where we're still developing our skills, such as social science and artificial intelligence. And the next of our values is we keep evolving. And if you want to be a world-leading science or tech organisation, it's obvious you can't rest on your laurels. You have to keep pushing boundaries to stay world-leading. And we've got some great examples of that here, but the first and most obvious one is our new supercomputing partnership with Microsoft. And if Paul were Minister Freeman, I would be thanking him for the £1.2 billion investment, which is going into our next 10 years and 2 generations of supercompute. And at the sort of scales, this will be the largest supercomputer dedicated to weather and climate anywhere in the world. And at the vast exascales we're now using, the processing power and the data handling for that kind of scale is such that actually it's a really expert job to do it. The Met Office has owned about our last 14 supercomputers. The very first one was owned by Lions Tea Rooms and they used it for their payroll, but since then we've run our own. But we're moving away from that. Microsoft will do it for us. And down the bottom there is a very different sort of partnership, a local one. So with Exeter University, we formed a joint centre for excellence in environmental intelligence. And the southwest of England is a real hub of great environmental data. So we've got the UK Hydrographic Office there and Plymouth Marine, as well as ourselves. And using the latest AI and machine learning techniques to make best use of that data and combine it with other data and in various forms of digital twins is one of the things we're working on. And a couple of those are being demonstrated, one here in the blue zone, one in the green zone this week. And at the other end of our value chain, as opposed to our values, we've been providing the information to what was Public Health England to give heat health warnings for many years. But we've just started doing a different kind of warning, which is an extreme heat warning ourselves, still with what is now the UK Health Security Agency. And that's because with rising temperatures in the UK, heat impacts are no longer really just on health. They are on infrastructure, on transport, on your ability to operate the plant. So the impacts go beyond what we used to think of as the traditional health impacts for heat. And the next of our values is we live and breathe it. And the purpose for the Met Office is helping you make better decisions to stay safe and thrive. And that really is what our staff come to work to do. And another of those examples is our Flood Forecasting Centre, which we run jointly with the Environment Agency. And again, worse and increased flooding is one of those impacts that we're already seeing as a result of climate change in the UK. We at the Met Office are very good at knowing when it's going to rain, but the flood forecasters also need to be good at hydrology, and the hydrologists come from the Environment Agency, and then we cross-train to give the best possible warnings together. At a different global part, we've been for 20 years working with the Voluntary Cooperation Programme of the WMO with developing nations, helping them get access to weather and climate information. And that picture up the top there is the leader of the National Met Service of Tanzania, Agnes Kijazi, in a brand new TV studio we'd only just helped them commission just before Hurricane Kenneth, trying to tell people in Tanzania about the hazards that are coming their way in person herself. And that's something we're really proud of the work we do there, and we've done that in many nations. And at a different scale, but at a national level, the Goal 13 Impact Platform is something which is, so Goal 13, you will know, is the UN Sustainability Development Goal for climate change. And we've partnered with the CBI, Chapter Zero, Deloitte and Dell, to provide this platform where businesses in the UK can share their own good practice and the challenges they're facing in becoming a net zero organisation, and share with each other and get there quicker. And I should say, while I'm at it, that the Met Office has our own Met Zero programme, which will get us to be a net zero organisation by 2030. And we've certainly needed Microsoft's help for that, because it's something of the dirty secret of weather and climate science that the supercomputers we use do use an awful lot of energy, and we need to be able to deliver that in a sustainable way, but Microsoft's supercomputer will allow us to do that. So the last of the values I haven't spoken about is being a force for good. And in the Met Office, we really care about our own environmental and social impact, and all my staff are constantly on my case, and my board is really committed to making sure that our impact on the planet is a positive one. And that starts with education, and we have a very large STEM outreach programme of many sorts. We have Met Office for schools, we're inside BBC Bite Size, we run science camps, which used to be physical but are currently virtual. But this is an example you can also see in the Green Zone. That's actually a TikTok feed, but it's of Minecraft education, and it's on the Microsoft stand, and it's some Minecraft adventures you can go through that are filled with weather and climate information, so you can choose about what you build there and learn at the same time. This is one of those programs with the long names at the top that the Minister referred to, so the Weather and Climate Information Services for Africa. And this is an FCDO-funded program. And under WISER 2, we've supported millions of Africans to access weather and climate information for their region. I think it's reached 3 million people over the course of that program. And one of the examples there, among many, many, is that we've helped the countries around Lake Victoria join together to produce a weather forecast for the lake, particularly for the fishing community, which has succeeded in reducing drownings there by a third, which is a wonderful outcome. And we were really delighted to see announced, I think last week, the funding for WISER 3, which means we'll be able to go on doing that great work. And we've got Nepal here today, and we've been doing work with you on that as well. So great to be doing that. And also in the overseas development field, but a different kind of work, is on one of our science partnerships, again with a long and complicated name. I call it WCSSP. But that's where we partner with scientists from across the globe. And yesterday I was with some of our Brazilian colleagues in the science pavilion next door talking about Amazon Face. Other examples, phone alerts for flooding in Sao Paulo, or mid-range forecasts for the Yangtze Basin. But the main point of that is that we help those nations who are already capable develop jointly further science expertise in climate modelling, and that's something that brings benefit to us all. So coming back to the better together, there's one other aspect I didn't flag as well as the partnership, and that's the diversity aspect. And if we're going to crack this as a community, we need all the talent that's going. And that's why I'm really pleased to be sharing the platform with Asha and Jagadish here. It's Gender Day today, and later on today I'll be speaking on a panel in the Science Pavilion with the leading women from WMO and IPCC on women in climate science. But there's one more picture I wanted to share with you, and this is a picture taken just before COVID in the Met Office of us hosting an LGBT event for civil servants from across the southwest of England. So the equality, diversity and inclusion is really part of who we are as an organisation. So I hope I've shown how seriously we take the need to partner at every level, locally, nationally and globally, and how that really builds our skills within the Met Office and as a science community to deliver what we all need. Thank you very much for listening to me. it's now a pleasure to introduce, virtually because he couldn't be here, the Secretary General of WMO, who's just going to talk a little bit more about partnerships from the WMO perspective, although we do have Max here as well, we're watching and sharing in this. And I hope, if I click a couple of times, there's Petteri, and I hope if I click again, he's going to speak to us. So Petteri, Italis.
Thank you for the opportunity to make a statement during this event focused on climate science partnerships for global action. I would like to acknowledge the leadership of Science Minister George Freeman and of Professor Penny Endersby, the Met Office CEO, and the leadership of the United Kingdom overall, not only in organization of COP26 but also through contributions made by UK researchers and their partners worldwide to climate change research, early warning systems, adaptation and policies. Firstly, I would like to say a few words about climate risks to Sustainable Development Goals. The World Meteorological Organization is a member state organization. Many WMO member countries require assistance in managing climate-related risks to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The assistance of advanced countries like the UK is essential for the capacity development of these WMO member developing countries. In September, WMO released an analysis of how the indicators WMO uses to monitor the state of the global climate affect Sustainable Development Goal achievement. That analysis makes clear that for the SDGs to be achieved by 2030 target, the risks posed by human-induced climate change must be understood and addressed. In conclusion, I would like to thank the UK government for its leadership and to echo the calls by the UK COP presidency to assemble the necessary partnerships and to mobilize the necessary financing for supporting global-scale climate action. WMO is committed to this endeavor and intends to continue working with the Green Climate Fund to support climate science-based investments and actions. I count on UK experts and institutions and those of other nations with advanced scientific and technical capacities to work with us through the Global Framework for Climate Services to ensure that developing countries have access to the best available science and can use that information to design and implement effective climate actions. I look forward to this collaboration and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Penny. Actually, can you hear me without... Oh, I'll try this. Oh, gosh. Okay. Loud and clear, right? So thank you very much, Penny. And I'm fascinated by the Minecraft. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and so I think we might be exploring that together. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our very sort of a diverse panel from all over the globe. So if each of you would introduce yourselves, and then we'll start the discussion. So if I start at the end, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Asha Mohammed, Secretary General, Kenya Red Cross Society.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Charlotte Watts, and I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
Good morning. I'm Jagdishwar Karmachari, Deputy Director General from Department of Hydrology and Meteorology, Nepal. Thank you.
I think I've been introduced, but I'm Penny Endersby, the Chief Executive of the Met Office in the UK.
And Paul Monks, Chief Scientific Advisor of the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy.
Perfect. Well, Paul, if I may start with you, but please feel free to chip in. What strikes you as the key advantages or successes of international scientific partnerships to tackle climate change?
It's a really good question, isn't it? And I think I'm going to pick up with the word that Penny finished her talk with, diversity. Why do we want to do international science? Why do we not want to do it all at home? Well, it's about diversity. What sort of diversity is it about? It's about diversity of thinking. We want to avoid groupthink. We want to hear different views. We want a diversity of science. You know, we want it to do science in different ways. We've got to, in climate science, have a diversity of geography. You know, and that is also a diversity of climate. So actually, it's all the diversities that drive the need to do international science. And if we are to solve a global climate problem, the clue's in the first word, global. And actually that means that we've got to work across the scales from local to global with people and scientists and local understanding, national understanding. So really, I don't think we can address the challenge of global climate science without partnerships and in that international context.
Lovely, thank you. Please.
I think Paul said most of it, but I just want to add another element of that, which is just on the diversity of the challenges that we face as well. We have the huge challenge of keeping the 1.5 degree ambition attainable. We also have the significance of the adaptation challenge that we all face. And if you just think of the breadth of the impacts that we need to create greater resilience to, it needs a diversity of thought and agendas that need to be informed by science. And just one other point, as well as that great partnership between science, which we all believe in, it also those partnerships with others who are decision makers, be it politicians, be it leaders, be it the communities that are impacted on, to steer what are the priority questions that science needs to come and help address, versus doing science for the sake of science.
Perfect, thank you. So now, how pressing are the impacts of climate change in the broader context of international development, and how do you see this evolving? And Asha, could I start with you on this?
Thanks. I think a lot has already been said about the impact of climate change, and maybe coming from a country like Kenya, where it's become our norm in the sense that we are moving from one disaster to another, and I think the last 3 years, I can say as an organization, we really have not had a break, and because we've been moving from a flooding to desert locust invasion, then we got COVID, and then now we have drought. So even as we sit here in Glasgow, we have more than 2 million Kenyans who have been affected by the drought situation, which unfortunately the science tells us that it could get worse because the rains have failed 3 seasons down the line, and the next rainy season is next year in March. So increasingly extreme events happening, many more people getting affected. Unfortunately, not enough time for people to recover, because the duration between one to another, of course, gets reduced. I think in terms of development, then I would say that we have lost a lot of the gains that we had made. And as Kenya in particular, I can say that today we are looking at communities that have been displaced for almost 2 years because of flooding, cannot even go back to the original land, because we talk about Lake Victoria, but Lake Victoria and many of the other lakes in the Rift Valley are having backflows. So they are actually taking up space where people used to live originally. And that is a big problem, because it means that you have communities that now don't have health services where they are. They do not have the schools that they used to have, and the housing. So you can imagine such a community really is almost starting again from scratch. Education is a big issue. Today, with the drought, we have many children not going to school in some of the affected areas because they have to move with the families to look for water and pasture. Talking about gender, which is something that I'm also very passionate about, is to say that women and girls continue to be disproportionately affected. We have many girls now who have had to leave school to stay home with their mothers to go and fetch water. Increase in sexual and gender-based violence, mental health issues. So I think we can go on, and I think even when we talk about SDGs and 2030, as much as I would like to be an optimist, I am a little bit worried that we may not actually achieve those targets. So clearly, the continued effects of climate change on the communities is having a toll on us. Thank you.
I might just come in on that if you don't mind. Just to say, I mean, that's a really stark illustration, Asha, of what the State of the Climate report was saying when it said the last 7 years were the 7 hottest on record, and extremes are now the new normal, and we're all of us living that to some extent, but so much more in the developing world. It's good for us all to hear it, I think.
Yeah, to add on the perspective, African perspective as I just shared, so I would just like to add a few perspective from our region, the Himalayas. As we all know that the developing countries, it's already difficult without the climate change. All the sustainable development goals, achieving those, it has already been difficult. And now with this climate change, which effects are already clearly visible, and more so in our region where we have this melting glacier, glacier-induced flood, which is almost every year now they are impacting the hydropowers that has been built with scarce resources. Now we are having this intense rainfall over the Trans-Himalayan region where we used to have, we still have houses that is built with mud in the roof, because in the past it only used to be snow and there is scarcely any rainfall. Now it's downpouring like anything. So the situation is very complex. Thank you.
Maggie, can I come in as we discuss this? I mean, they're two very moving kind of real stories of this, but there's a real science goal that underlies this, or science point that underlies this, and I think it's one when we face climate change. It's very easy to talk on Science Innovation Day a lot about mitigation, but you're hearing strong stories from Kenya and Nepal there that they're having to adapt as well to that changing climate. And I think a challenge for the science community is not to always think about the bright future that mitigation offers, but also what adaptation that we need to do and bring to bear on the ground around the world in real countries. So it's never mitigation or adaptation, it's mitigation and adaptation. And it's making sure that that is also a resilient, long-term solution. And my final quick point is that I think that the challenge for science is we don't need much more attribution of the problems of climate change. We need to move to science for solutions, and that's science for solutions for adaptation and mitigation.
So global action.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just sort of based on sort of hearing these experiences, how do we get that out to people? I have a daughter, an 11-year-old daughter, and she's aware of climate change, but how do we really drive it home to people that these situations are happening and change has to happen? Penny, I don't know if you can tackle that. You were talking about some of the work you were doing with Microsoft and things.
Well, but also with all our communications work, and in many ways what we've always done for weather, because the weather forecast is no good in our operations suite. It has to be out where the people are going to change the decisions. We now need to do for climate. And actually, I was speaking with BBC Media Action yesterday, which is their charitable arm of the BBC, what used to be the World Services Trust, about how we reach that communication around the globe. But the other thing, I think, is how we balance those frightening and distressing stories that we need people to engage with seriously, without turning people off. And I'm really indebted to Lord Stern, actually, who has reminded us that there is a future there that is quieter, cleaner, greener, more equal, more biodiverse and safer, that there's something positive to aim for. So the "it's not too late" message is really important, as well as the "it's real, it's here, it's serious, and we need to do something about it" message.
Yeah, I do understand that's a fine balance to keep.
I think there is a challenge, though, and a challenge that we're probably not grasping. I mean, we talk about global climate models and we show big pictures, but the question I keep getting asked on the radio is, well, what can I do?
Yes.
What can I do as a citizen on the street? And I think there's a challenge for us as scientists again and communicators to talk about that. I'm going to go global on you. It's a global problem, but it's a local action that's needed to solve it. And some way of communicating that glocality of the problem. So that's a terrible phrase, isn't it? Glocality of the problem.
I think it's going to catch on, but thank you. So, sorry, please.
I hope you don't mind. You're just interested in this. I mean, I think, we have a real risk of just saying it all is so scary and it's going to be terrible, and it is really scary, and if we don't take action, it is going to be dreadful. But actually, these examples of where there is innovation, where there is new solutions being developed, and a lot of that, there'll be examples, is that how do we inspire people to think about what a more resilient world looks like, a 1.5 degree world looks like. I mean, and so linking back to the science around around meteorological forecasting. I mean, some of the programs that I'm excited about are, for example, where you're embedding science expertise, meteorological expertise into planning ministries, for example, in cities across. We have a program that supports a number of cities to have that planning information to then think about, well, actually, when you are, investing in housing in your sewage system, or actually, how do you future-proof it? How do you think about what are the pressures you're going to experience, and how do you try and embed that into the decision-making processes that all governments are having to think through and and adapt and change and ensure that science is really feeding into policy and decision-making.
Well, that sort of brings me very nicely onto my next question, and it's sort of everybody here sort of works with governments or in governments, but do scientists have enough influence? This is a slightly loaded question, especially as a scientist myself, but yes, do scientists have enough influence over governments, and should we have more?
I mean, if I can carry on the conversation, if you want. I mean, in a way, COVID has created, I think, more of an opportunity for scientists to be more influential in government. I mean, if I just reflect on the UK, people know the government scientist's name. They know our chief medical officer's name. They're now sort of, national stars. So, when has that happened in the science world? So I do think just as we, embedded and used data to inform our national responses to COVID, we need to be taking that same sense of urgency, that same need for data for evidence-based decision-making into responding to climate. And we have the same, if not a greater urgency to bring that science in. And it takes partnership again between the scientists in universities. Scientists like Paul and I are embedded in different government departments, scientists in industry, as well as that other types of information and knowledge that comes from communities and organisations that are on the front line of the response to COVID. I mean, to climate, learning from COVID.
Please.
I may add. Yeah, we are hearing since the last week that even in this part of the world, it's difficult that to have the government and policymaker to listen to scientists and scientific advices. And you can imagine it's even more difficult in our part of the world. Partly because our government has more pressing issue to deal with. Instead of thinking long ahead in future, they have more urgent and immediate action on the basic things like health, education, that kind of thing, transport they have to focus on. And second point is that I would like to add, because the solutions we, the scientists, can provide to the government, that may not be tailored to the needs. And it's where this global partnership, I think, that we are speaking about, that could be very helpful so that we can produce some of the solutions using the knowledge that has and practices that is already in implementation in this part of the world. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Please.
Maybe just to add and to say that I think one of the solutions really is to maybe amplify the voice of the scientists by the collaboration we are talking about. So, for example, for us as the Red Cross, globally we have a climate center which is supporting the national societies in our work. But in Kenya Red Cross, we have a unit which is made up of climate scientists as well, who work very closely with the Kenya Meteorological Department. So when we speak as the authority in terms of disaster response and say that we are preparing in this way because the scientists have told us this, I think people listen. So how do you join up with all the relevant actors and ensure that that information doesn't come in a standalone fashion, which maybe doesn't make sense to a lot of people? So I think it's also a question of all of us coming together and advocating and actually speaking even for the scientists in a way, because when we speak that our work is actually based on the science we receive, then there's much more credibility than just the scientists themselves just trying to pass out these messages.
Please.
Yeah, okay. And I was just saying to Aisha before our panel started, I mean, the Red Cross do this brilliant work where they're not only understanding what's going to happen, what does that mean for their emergency services, but they've invested in how do you translate that technical information into something that's operational on the ground. So there's a really important element of how do you make that step? How does it, if you've got a risk of a flooding event, actually what is it that on the ground people need to have in front of them so they can make a decision early? Or if you're thinking of longer term projections, how do you communicate that technical analysis in very accessible forms and in the ways that can be operationalized?
Maggie, I can come in on this one as well. I mean, I think that we've heard the phrase evidence-based policymaking. That makes politics logical, which it's not, in my experience. Yes. So I think we've got to move to evidence-influenced policymaking and recognise that we influence that policymaking. I think one of the questions, I think, in this discussion a little bit, and some of the challenges, particularly, Asha was talking about in Kenya, is avoided cost. If you take these measures, you avoid cost. And I think governments have a real challenge with valuing avoided cost. Yes. In this, because if you actually make something resilient to flooding, you actually avoid the cost of the misery and that will cause. Yeah. So I think we've got to find some way, and so therefore it makes sense to do these things because you're actually avoiding cost, you're avoiding having to do things once these things have happened. So I think if we can get that forward and backward-looking view working more clearly, there's another way to get governments to value a little bit more the sort of stuff that climate science can do in avoiding costs.
But isn't that a sort of the challenge of human nature? We deal with the immediate and so, oh yeah, well, someone else will probably cover that later. How do we get the urgency and yet not scare people off?
I don't know. We build flood barriers, don't we?
Yes.
We recognise that actually, flooding of storm surges in the UK, that we built flood barriers in order to stop the cost of the impact on our economy of that. So we can do it when we think about it, and it's real for us as well.
Yes, but how about in the developing world? Because I know some programs have been put in place, and then because things are changing so rapidly, they're non and obsolete, and so you need to think of the next thing. So I think that's the next challenge. Things are moving along quite fast. How do we tackle that? Okay, food for thought, I think. Okay, so now when it comes to climate action, it's important that people and organisations use science to change how we do things. What is the role of science when it comes to working with businesses and local communities to ensure that the necessary changes happen? So we've been talking about governments. Now let's talk about a more local level.
Oh, I think this is a really core thing. It's about partnerships, and it's about. Can I use the buzzword co-creation? I'm sorry. I do apologise. I do apologise to the audience for. I've not said synergy yet, though, so be careful.
But it's coming. It's
coming. But I think in climate more than anything, actually, it is. What is the biggest thing you can do? Actually, why do governments change? It's because the people ask them to change. Yes. And therefore that understanding and that co-creation of knowledge and understanding can be something that can drive that. And that's, we're talking about climate science partnerships, and it's partnerships between governments and scientists, it's partnerships between people and scientists, partnership between people and governments. All those different partnerships are the partnerships that you need in order to drive change with climate.
If I may add, I think adding to what Paul has just said, so to have people and business listen to us, I think we need to be relevant with them. Yes. So we should build trust, right? So for that, instead of just telling what to do, the things we have got from our models, we should better start engaging more actively with them, build this partnership, collaboration, some of the word that has come, and then try to develop solutions for them. As we said, they have various things to tackle with instead of these challenges of weather and climate. So we should, I think, first build their trust by developing products that are relevant to them, right? And then onward, I think we can talk, after building the trust, we can talk on the long-term goals, how we can prevent this from getting more aggravated.
Yes, but I think trust is so much the key, because without trust, everything falls apart.
Yeah. Maybe just to make another, instead of co-creation, then also to talk about co-production between the different partnerships, but also at community level. And with all due respect to science, I mean, communities themselves are their own scientists. They have lived with these events over time, and they have their own way of even giving information about what they think is going to happen based on those lived experiences. And I think it's important to bring that, into the picture and be able to then work together on the products that he was mentioning. So I think it's really critical that communities are part of the process and not just recipients of the information, that they can also contribute, and so that at the end of the day, even the communication that goes out is something that is going to be useful. I know one of the things we keep saying now is that the weather forecast should not be about what the weather will be, but it's more important about what will the weather do, so that even for the simple farmer, they are able to make decisions. Is it better to go and till the farm today, or should I wait 3 weeks? Because then it's clear that there'll be no rain until 3 weeks' time, and maybe I'll just be doing, I'll be wasting my seeds. So I think it's really important to look at that from that perspective, and I think communities may not have all the details of maybe what comes from the professional scientists, but I think they have a lot of valuable information as well, and for them to accept also what is coming on from the other direction, they need to be part of that process.
Yes, and I think that's so key. As a science communicator, I think in the past we sort of, we lectured people about, yes, this is what's going to happen, this is the science. But now a dialogue is so much more powerful because people are experiencing it out there, and it sort of lends to our knowledge.
It makes me wonder, actually, Maggie, with so impact-based forecasting, which is what Asha just describes, is something that is now really riven through the meteorological community, and it's far, far more effective than saying there'll be 50 millimetres of rain. It depends where you are. Saying there'll be 50 millimetres of rain on London in rush hour in an hour, that means the whole tube system's going to be paralysed, whatever. So that's what we mean. I'm not sure to what extent we do impact-based predictions for climate change, but we know whenever we engage with a new community, we absolutely have to understand what they're trying to achieve as a weather forecaster to know what the impact-based forecasting is. You cannot do it unless you know what they're trying to achieve and what the possible weather impacts are. And I think maybe there's more we could do as a community, as a science community, to engage with the impacts of the climate change more. And all of us, I get asked to speak all the time on what do I need to do as an individual? I spoke in Exeter Cathedral recently on what we should be doing as a community, and about just transition. And I think that's where all of us have the opportunity to engage more with the different groups of people that we do understand, because it's much harder to do it with the people whose lived experience you don't know.
Yes. But I guess one of the challenges is setting up the framework to enable that to happen. And I guess that's one of the things we need to be looking at in the future. Perfect.
Before you go on this one, I know Charlotte wants to flag it to me.
Yes.
I want to come at you mentioned the word business, and we haven't picked up that business, that angle around business, and we've linked to communities. I mean, business are an important force of change. And in my mind, we're not using them enough to drive that sort of change and incentivize them to be those progenitors. And we've lots of good examples here in the UK about the wind and renewables industry, where government subsidy started. Now, actually, we're producing very, very cheap power, and actually they're fighting to actually invest in the infrastructure to put it in. There's more green finance available than there are green projects to invest in. Which I think is another quite damning indictment of kind of where we are. So there's actually more capital out there than there wanted. So how do we harness the power of businesses? And I think it's important across the globe. I think it's not just I don't like developing world, but in other countries as well. I think businesses can be part of that, and governments can use businesses to drive some of the changes that they want. So the business has got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Yes. And it's funny because I'm seeing more of that. People talk about sort of greenwashing, but I feel that industry is behind change. I think they see it coming, and they know that if they don't, they're going to be left behind. So I'm fairly optimistic. Sorry, Charlotte.
Conversation going so many directions, I don't know which topic to come in on now. I mean, just to say that issue we were talking about the metrics, right? How do you value that you prevented a severe impact? Is not a new one. It like you said, we take preventive actions for flooding. I come in from health, and we invest significantly in prevention, because we know prevention is far more cost effective than dealing with some outbreak or whatever afterwards. So I do think we need to think about in the kind of metrics and information flows, how do we get better at quantifying that preventive benefit, that preventive benefit. And if you think about the preventive actions around adaptation and resilience, it's across many, many sectors. So even if we get the analysis not quite right, the number's going to be really big if you prevent it. So I do think it's an area where we should be sort of putting our combined technical brains and both sort of from the hard and soft sciences to think about how do we make those arguments to different communities, and that includes to business. And I was in a really interesting discussion here yesterday where people were just talking about your whole, for example, investment framework around infrastructure investments. It used to be something that gave you value over a long time frame. Now, because of the threats of climate change, some of those infrastructures are no longer resilient. Yes. And actually, when you shorten that time frame, it becomes a far more expensive investment option. Whilst if you can invest in a resilient infrastructure, it becomes low cost. So, some of our fundamental ways we think about costs, inputs, and returns have to recalibrate because of the impacts of climate change. The other point I wanted to make is just actually, I think the issue you're saying about how do we work with communities, how do we understand the big problems on the ground in different contexts, and how does science respond to that, actually challenges our frameworks on science. Because to me, it means we have to get far more into a solutions-aligned research space where we're saying, how do we align incentives? How do we get those connections? How do we make them real? So that actually the products and the sort of expertise science can offer really does drive through to benefit for the most vulnerable. And we know climate will impact on the most vulnerable. So and to be honest, academia, science doesn't always incentivize reaching the most vulnerable or working with the groups who are experiencing those issues or most aware of it. And I think that's the new paradigm that actually we should move to. And if you don't mind a shameless plug, we have the Adaptation Research Alliance that we're launching at 11:30 at the UNFCCC in meeting room 4. And it's a new research alliance. We've got hundreds of partners coming in, and it is really trying to think about how do we have that new paradigm in research that does get us into that solution-focused space. So if you're interested in that, please do come along.
Perfect, thank you. And good plug. So actually, we've got about 7 minutes left. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience, because, yes, actually, I'll pass you my microphone. I think that's probably easiest.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting session. And I am Takashongo from Japan. I happen to be a member of the Climate Change and Resilience Committee in Japan. And I'm not a scientist, I'm an economist. But for me, one of the serious and very critical issue is communication. So the communication is important. So the scientists need to be engaged. But sometimes exaggeration of the risk is spread out by the media. For instance, the distribution probability, that is a science word. And only the extreme cases are reported by media. So the too much exaggeration are maybe not a good thing to take action. So in the case of UK, what kind of communication to inform the proper understanding of the risk? This is my question.
Would you like me to take that one?
Oh, yes, that sounds good. Thank you.
So I think probably in the UK, I don't see the media exaggerating the impacts of climate change. In fact, if anything, I think we very often take the middle case, and we as scientists know that some of the extremes that are still possible are also out there and are risks we should think about. Where I do see it is with some of the pressure groups like Extinction Rebellion, where they talk about the risk of humans going extinct within a couple of hundred years or something. You go, no, there's absolutely no science to back that up whatsoever. And so trying to broadly, I'm sympathetic to the aims, which is let's decarbonise quickly. But I think some of the messages are not necessarily very valid. Would be my take.
So I'll give you a reflection on this, and I think I was talking to one of the chairs of the IPCC Working Group 2 report, and if you think about the reports, there have been, there's probably, likely, probably likely, probably uncertainly, this time climate change is unequivocal. And isn't that a beautiful way of communicating clearly where we've got? So it's taken us a decade of scientists to get past probably, highly likely, highly probable to unequivocal. And I think, I'm being very English and choosing words, but I think the IPCC has realised that it's got to communicate more clearly about these sort of risks. Because the question of communication, and Maggie is a communicator, that's what she does for a living. You've always got to understand your audience and it. And actually by sometimes submerging some of the science and some of the uncertainty in there, but also recognising it, it's a way of communicating it. In government policy, we take uncertainty incredibly important. It's incredibly important when we're putting policy, but it doesn't need to be up front and there. It's got to be a clear message. So I think that balance is absolutely critical. And I think the IPCC is a very, very interesting journey on that sort of on that front.
We found it in COVID as well, haven't we? One wobble on what we say about the safety of vaccines for children, and it has months and months of lasting, or pregnant women, months and months of lasting effect, long after the uncertainty's gone, because lots of them have been vaccinated, and now we know it's the right thing to do, but the population heard it once and they're still nervous.
Yes. And I think that is the power of the media, and so working with the media to get the right message across is the challenge, I think. So we've only got 4 minutes left. So my final question is, there is less than a decade to go on the 2030 agenda and global goals. We've heard from Penny how these partnerships are contributing, but what needs to happen now to accelerate their collective impact? How do we do it faster?
Gosh, we need an agreement next door.
So how do we get it? That's the thing. I think as scientists we can input, but it's just all the local challenges, as you were saying. It's the local problems that, or the immediate problems that people face. How do we get this long-term view?
If I may add, one of the things that I would like to stress is that we need to accelerate the collaboration. But often this sort of international collaboration are, driven by what is perceived is the good. The things we have already talked about, like what is our solution need to be specific for the local community. Similarly, this sort of partnership, I think, should first engage with the partners as well. We need to accelerate, of course, but then the solution we are proposing should be relevant to if we are, let's say, UK Met offices building collaboration with the other national Met offices, then the situation may be very different in each countries. So I think there's a need to take good stock taking of what the needs are and identify the need, consult with them, and then try to build a solution that will give, that will be sustainable, that will be lasting, that will be give more value of money, let's say, more visible. So we need to think on that. Thank you.
Can I just add slightly to what I said then, Maggie, and slightly more seriously? For mitigation, we know what we need to do, right? We need to stop deforesting. We've got the methane deal. Now we need the fossil fuels to stay in the ground. The solution is perfectly clear. It's the way to get there. Yes. For adaptation, it's not so clear, and there's still work to do on actually what the right solutions are. And neither is it quite so global. The right solutions are more regional. But we need to do that. We need to do the mitigation actions fast. The science is perfectly clear on the fact that we have no way of removing the carbon at scale yet, and we can't wait till we have such a way. We've got to stop emitting.
Yes, thank you.
So this is the decade for action, isn't it? The 2030s, and science leads the way. It's science for solutions to support society. And that's the criticality in here. So we should support the negotiations, we should support governments in all the ways to make the changes that we require, but this is a decade of action.
Yes. So I think sorry, please. No, please.
No, again, from the community level, we know what can work. I mean, there are good examples of, things that can move this agenda, and I think it's just about identifying and scaling those up, and of course, more importantly, the resources for adaptation, because I think, yes, mitigation, but we're saying millions of people today are affected already. So when we're talking about SDGs, I don't think we have time to wait for all the other commitments. So where are the resources, where is the partnership and the commitments to do something today? That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that, I mean, the 2030 goals are under threat, the achievement. We have to integrate resilience to climate into everything, all of the goals, targets. This is the new reality in which we're trying to deliver in 2030. We need partnership, we need pace, we need evidence-based decision-making, and we need to also continue to generate that evidence, and that's where the Adaptation and Resilience Alliance is trying to create a new opportunity to really get that evidence into the adaptation space, because I think there the complexity of the issues that we have to tackle urgently is huge and most significant.
Perfect. Well, I think, oh yes, the clock is now flashing at me, but I think that's one of the things that I'm finding here at COP. We need collaboration. We need that mix of people, and COP brings many different people from many different countries together. And I think there's a definite power in that. So I think on that note, it's a good place to end. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our amazing panel.